Hey folks, welcome to another set of 8th grade science video notes. In today's lesson, we'll be discussing the process and purpose of cellular division through mitosis and what role this type of cellular division plays in asexual reproduction. Here's a standard that we'll be covering this lesson as well as in the next lesson. Let's get started. First off, what is mitosis? Mitosis is a simple process in which the nucleus of a cell divides. It's one possible second step of the three-step life cycle of a cell. During mitosis, the duplicated DNA gets split apart into separate nuclei. This allows the parent cell to split in half, creating two new identical daughter cells. The purpose of mitosis is to create body cells for growth and repair. Mitosis is the reason that we're taller than we were as a baby. It's also the reason that your skin's able to repair itself after you've damaged it in some way. Body cells are constantly dying and forming new ones, so the goal is that through mitosis, our bodies are able to continue to repair itself as older cells die off. It's important to remember that cellular division through mitosis creates two new completely identical daughter cells that look exactly as the parent they came from. There are 4 steps to mitosis: prophase, metaphase, anaphase, and telophase, or PMAT for short. The life cycle of a cell generally happens in 3 stages: interphase, which is a period of cellular growth, mitosis or meiosis, in which the nucleus divides into 2 or 4 nuclei, and cytokinesis, where the cell finally splits apart, creating 2 new cells, or 4 if meiosis is the second step. Let's dig a little deeper into those 3 steps. Interphase is the stage in which the cell spends most of its life. During interphase, the cell grows to about twice its original size. The DNA exists in the loose form called chromatin, and the DNA duplicates itself, so the cell will end up with 2 full sets of DNA before it moves on to the next step. The next step is some type of nuclear division, either mitosis or meiosis. If mitosis, the nucleus gets split into 2 new identical nuclei, each with a full set of DNA. If it's meiosis, the nucleus gets split into 4 new, completely different nuclei, completely different being the important part there, each with half a set of DNA. So we'll talk more about meiosis in the next lesson. Once the cell has 2 nuclei, or 4, it can split apart between those 2 nuclei and form new cellular membrane, or cell wall. This step is called cytokinesis because the cytoplasm divides or moves during this step. Let's take a look at mitosis a little bit closer. As we said, the steps to mitosis are prophase, metaphase, anaphase, and telophase. During prophase, which happens right after interphase is over, the DNA folds into itself, condensing into chromosomes. At the same time, the membrane around the nucleus breaks apart so that chromosomes are now open to traveling around the whole cell. Then the spindles form on the edges of the cell and shoot out spindle fibers that latch onto those chromosomes. These spindle fibers are responsible for moving the DNA where it needs to go over the next few steps. The second step is metaphase. This is where the spindle fibers move the chromosomes so that they line up perfectly just in the middle. You can remember this step by remembering that chromosomes move to the middle during metaphase. The next step is anaphase, where the spindle fibers pull those chromosomes to opposite sides of the cells, splitting them into their separate chromatids, which are still called chromosomes, so that there's exactly the same DNA on each side of the cell. You can remember that one because during anaphase, the chromosomes get pulled apart. Lastly, during telophase, the DNA loosens back up into chromatin, and the nuclear membranes reform. You can think of telophase as basically the opposite of prophase. After mitosis is finally through, cytokinesis allows the cell to split itself apart so that one nucleus is in one daughter cell and the other nucleus is in the other daughter cell. This is how we get 2 new cells that are exactly identical to each other. Now, those 2 cells can go through interphase, repeat the whole process. As a reminder, asexual reproduction is the type of reproduction that only requires one parent. It only involves diploid cells, also known as body cells, which have full sets of DNA. We'll learn about haploid cells, which have half sets of DNA, when we discuss meiosis and sexual reproduction in the next lesson. For eukaryotic cells, cells with a nucleus, this means that the main process that drives asexual reproduction is mitosis. This is why the offspring look exactly identical to the parent, because they're just made of copies of the same cells the parent had. The only time that this is not true is when there are random genetic mutations, which can and do happen. The advantage of asexual reproduction is that new offspring can be formed fairly quickly. The main disadvantage is that the whole population will all have the same traits, which means any environmental change that's negative will affect the whole population. In other words, if it's bad for one of the organisms, it'll be bad for all of them. This makes it really easy for the whole population to get wiped out. There are several different types of asexual reproduction. We're just going to talk about 6 of them today. Binary fission is the only weird one that doesn't use mitosis. Why doesn't it use mitosis? Well, because binary fission is what we call cellular division for cells that don't have a nucleus. These prokaryotic cells can't undergo mitosis, or meiosis for that matter, because you can't go through the step of nuclear division if you don't have a nucleus. They basically go through interphase and cytokinesis without all the fancy steps of mitosis that helps DNA get split apart perfectly. Because of this, bacteria and other cells that undergo binary fission are very prone to genetic mutations when they divide. Budding is a type of asexual reproduction in which the parent organism has a growth that falls off, and then that growth forms a whole new identical organism. This happens with things like hydra or sponges or cacti. This happens with things like sponges or hydra or cacti. Vegetative propagation is very similar, but instead of a growth that falls off, vegetative propagation is just when an actual piece of that plant that wasn't necessarily meant to fall off does fall off or is taken off and grows into a whole new identical organism. This is heavily used in gardening. Fragmentation is very similar to vegetative propagation, but instead of random pieces of plants that get cut off or fall off, this happens with more complex organisms that have segments that are designed to fall off at certain points. Starfish, for instance, have break-off points that are designed in their body structure, so that when one of its arms falls off, it can regrow that arm on the original organism, which is called regeneration, and then that arm can regrow the whole rest of the body, and that is called fragmentation. Sporogenesis is when plants like ferns or funguses, like mushrooms, grow spores that fall off and grow into new organisms. These spores are basically like seeds, but they're usually very small and without a hard shell. Lastly, and one of the coolest ones, is parthenogenesis. This is not a very common one, and only a few different types of organisms can do it, like some sharks and some lizards. During parthenogenesis, a female produces an egg cell, which was meant to be made through meiosis, so it later could be fertilized by a sperm cell. However, it gets made through mitosis, which means it already has a full set of DNA and doesn't need to be fertilized. You don't have to draw a picture for this one on the table in your notebook, but if you'd like to draw some symbol of feminism or woman power, you're more than welcome to and might earn a little bit of extra credit. I always think of parthenogenesis with the phrase, "I'm a strong, independent woman and I don't need no man to complete me," or make an offspring with. Anyway, that's all for today, folks. If you have any questions, as always, please ask.